The facts that he put into that are not true. Now, some of the stuff in his video is mostly opinion. Hey guys, thanks so much for joining me on the channel today. My name is Steve. Today we're talking rebuttals. Ty the Prodigy put out a video that was total on the Apollo Solo, and he's like, hey, watch this, and I'll tell you all the reasons why the UAD Apollo Solo is terrible. I'm kind of a wanker, but I'm a factual wanker, and in this video, we're gonna be getting factual here in just a minute. Time out. Before we get started, my producers told me that you'd be doing yourself a favor if you subscribe to my channel, leave a comment below, and like the video, because that helps me dominate the world. Let's get started. The main thing that made me make this video is how he said that the Apollo Solo gets out-spec'd by the Mo2 interface. That's not true, and that's what we're gonna look at. So let's do it, let's pull this up. All it takes is just 2 simple Google searches to find the product manuals of both the M2 and the UAD Solo. All right, so when he says that the Apollo Solo is out-spec'd by the Mo2 M2, that's just downright wrong. The first thing that I have to mention on that is the impedance. This is kind of something that you'd probably overlook, but it's the entire reason that you go out and get one of these things, right? So it's the Unison tech. For those of you that don't know, Unison is the modeling technology that Universal Audio has created, and it models tons of different stuff. You can model guitar amps, mic pre's. Famously, they've modeled like Neve, SSL, UA610s. They've even got like the Korg 3000 delay that Edge used, and stuff like that. So super cool, but yeah, M2 don't have that, and because of that, right, when you have your microphone plugged in, it's gonna interact in the gain stage totally different than what the M2 would do, and there ain't no amount of software that's gonna interact with your microphone that way. So that's a huge win for the Apollo Solo over the M2. The next technical spec that really pops out to me is dynamic range, right? You look at it, and when you go onto the website, and maybe this is where the confusion kind of came in, because if you go onto the website of Mo2, they say the dynamic range is one thing, but then when you change the measurement of the dynamic range to the A weighting, which is something that you can measure between the 2 different interfaces, because that's what Universal Audio gives you, that's what they give you as well in the manual, then you'll see that the measurement on the Apollo Solo is better. Measurement on the Apollo Solo is 118 decibels of dynamic range. So win to Apollo Solo once again. So the next technical spec that I gotta mention is THD. Once again, winner is gonna be on the Apollo Solo. Negative 108 versus negative 97. So what that basically means is that you have greater dynamic range, so your quiet parts versus your loud parts, and also the distortion is much lower. So the final topic that I want to talk about is the actual gain on the preamps, right? This is pretty important. Winner, again, the Apollo Solo at plus 65 dB of gain versus the M2 at plus 60. Now I want to have a really big clarification to all of this. At the end of the day, what really matters is what you do with the tool that you have. Let's not forget the Beatles had 2-track tape, and it was horribly noisy, but somehow they changed the world with their music. Could you do it with an Apollo Solo? Absolutely. Could you do it with an M2? Absolutely. But I just wanted to make this rebuttal video as a point. It's not out-spec'd. It's meant for something very specific. It's meant for a very specific audience. But from a technical standpoint, absolutely no way is it over-spec'd by the other one. There's a few other technical specs that Mo2 did not provide. Mo2 didn't mention anything about their environment or the power specifications, so we kind of can't really compare that. It did win out in a few like specific areas. I think the TRS jack. I think the TRS jack had a little bit more detail. The differences between the two, they're really close in general, but if we're being technical here, you don't want the wrong information out there, and that's why I made this video. I will also point out from a usability standpoint, the Apollo Solo wins once again, being that there's less latency when you actually use the device, because everything's being monitored inside the device, not from your computer and back out. And that's how the DSP works inside of the device. A practical example would be you have your microphone hooked up, you've got compressor on your voice, maybe an EQ, maybe a delay. There's going to be 1.1 milliseconds of latency on the Apollo Solo, whereas if you did that same setup with the Mo2, the Mo2 is going into your DAW. The DAW is processing the audio, and if you have a large project, that's gonna push back the latency to a point where it might even be unusable for you to be able to monitor in real time that way. So you'd have to monitor without any effects, and that might mess up your session, that might not mess up your session. It's just the nature of the business, and then once again, that's why you have a really cheap interface versus a really expensive interface here. This is gonna be a more professional tool, period. And then there's another thing that he mentioned was maxing out the DSP. And there's a way around that as well. You want to stamp your sounds on the way in, or you also want to be able to bounce things inside of your session to WAV file, and that's another way around that. I'm going to be making more videos about that later on, so we can talk about that at another time if you would like to see a video on that. Leave a comment below if you'd like me to show you a video on how to get a great acoustic guitar tone and some miking techniques there, or if you want to see some tones with electric guitars, or if you want to see how to get a great vocal sound, I'll do a video on that as well. One thing that I would like to point out that the M2 does win in is obviously the price point. If you're just getting into it and if you're just getting into tracking, if you're just getting into writing music, it's a great way to get your ideas down on the cheap and kind of get your feet wet. But if this is your passion, if music is your passion, and you eventually plan on going down the road of releasing music, you could do that with the Apollo Solo and really compete. Ty talks about the future, right? I think his point was like, well, why wouldn't I get a Twin X or a Quad? Because of the DSP being limited. Why not just jump to the X16? Like, why do you gotta just jump to that level? No, like, just go big or go home, right? Look, the Apollo Solo does cascade. This guy will plug into your next system. So if you're talking about the future, you're not locked into anything, and you don't have to throw the device out when you upgrade later. You can keep it. But one thing I really would like to point out is that as a pro myself, I actually went to this Apollo Solo after I already had the X8 and the Twin X. And why is because I can literally just put this in a backpack and plug it in right from this. This is fantastic. So, and I actually have done this very recently. I'll probably be doing it this week as well, where I'll be going and tracking someone remotely outside of my studio. I can use the Unison tech, and that affects the way my microphones respond. Whereas if I just get a completely dry signal from just a dry, clean mic pre, it's not going to have the sound that I want. There is a point that I need to clarify. Much of my argument and much of my point of view comes from the Thunderbolt edition of the Apollo Solo. They do make a USB-C version, and that one has a few drawbacks that I personally, I don't know that I am vibing with a whole lot, being that it has to have like a power point, right? So that's kind of confusing from a product standpoint, but that's only because of the limitations of USB-C itself. So, and it has to do with a couple other things. But anyway, final thing here that I kind of wanted to talk about is comparing the M2 to the Apollo Solo. You have one more additional advantage that almost no one really even considers, and it's something that I've kind of noticed myself working with artists is, of course, I've got UAD gear here, and I have artists that come in, they love the sound of their voice on some of the settings that I have. If they had something like this, they could go home and I could give them the preset. They could load it up on their end and continue to make demos you can emulate those settings directly with this device and get the unison feedback, get that impedance change, get those gain stage sweet spots. M2 just don't do that. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you disagreed, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you do agree, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see anything in particular, maybe, UAD related, let me know. I'd love to hear it, and I would absolutely make a video on it. Subscribe to my channel, and thanks. Until next time, guys. See you later.